What Ike Allen and Andy Anderson have created at AVAIYA is what the world needs.
Hello, AVAIYA family. I'm Andy Anderson. My partner Ike Allen and I are teachers, mentors, and the co-owners of AVAIYA University. AVAIYA is the creator of over 1,000 books, films, courses, teachings, and other supportive resources. Thank you, as always, for joining us. Our fellow teacher, Michelle Farris, is back with us today to talk about Stop Seeking External Validation, Healing Codependency from the Inside Out. Michelle is a licensed psychotherapist, anger management specialist, author, course creator, and one day at a time activist. She loves helping codependent people create healthy relationships without sacrificing their big heart. She's been featured on several podcasts and online publications for her work on anger as well as codependency. And in her private practice, she believes that trusting yourself is the first cornerstone in creating mutually satisfying connections. She can often be found with a venti latte from Starbucks while working on her next project. Welcome back to AVAIYA, Michelle.
Thank you. And that's still true.
Still drinking Starbucks. There you go.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, thank you for doing this. And I absolutely love this topic today. And we both personally relate to this topic, which is even better. So let's talk, right? How does codependency relate to seeking external validation?
So when you're codependent, you're externally focused, right? You're typically focused on helping, fixing, getting validation. And part of the reason we do that is because we don't have a strong sense of self. So our whole focus is outward. You know, what can I find outside of myself to make me feel good? Because we don't know how to validate ourselves. And, you know, in codependency, a lot of times that shows up in our relationships, or it also shows up in things like your job, how well your kids are doing, if you're the star volunteer, how much you give, what other people think. And, you know, I think we all need some of that. I think some external validation is, you know, of course, part of life, but if it starts to define you and that's the only way you get validated, it's going to change like the wind. And it's really, it really gets actually toxic, I think, after a while. I know for me it did, but it took me a long time to realize that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. It's such an interesting thing. And I love that you mentioned, right, you think some of it's like, right, okay, because, right, we needed, as children, we needed to be externally validated, right, in order to develop. And that's an interesting thing, right? Where does that, like, where do we end that and then become, right, people who can validate themselves, I guess.
Right. Well, I was thinking about that because what I used to do is I would literally make call after call after call in one day because I had to have somebody either validate what I was going through, tell me I was okay, or that I was worth something. And I fast forward now, I realize like I can go on my walk and not call anybody and not really need that. And if something happens, I can say, you know what, Michelle, good job. Or like my YouTube video this week didn't do that well. And instead of going, oh my God, I totally messed that up. It's like, you know what? I stand behind my work. I'm good. But it's like learning how to undo that you have to make me feel better. I think that's where the biggest struggle is in the beginning, because a lot of times when you're codependent, you don't realize you're doing it. I didn't realize I was calling excessively. I thought I was being an extrovert.
Right.
And a good friend.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
You know?
Yeah. Right. And I totally get it because I understand it's kind of like my experience of it is kind of like an addictive kind of thing. And for me, like we were sharing before we started this, right, that the external validation shows up for me more in my romantic partnership with Ike, as opposed to friendships, and how, yes, catching myself during some moments of it's such an urge, like, why didn't he say I'm good enough? Right. Like, why didn't it happen in that moment? And being able to just like take a breath and be like, oh, right, that I don't need to have that happen. Right. It doesn't have to happen.
Well, because even when you do get it, and I'll say you, but I really mean us, it's short-lived. It's like, it feels great for 5 seconds and then you're back to square one again.
Right. Yes. Yeah. And then we just keep seeking. So, okay. Why is it that codependents get into this kind of cycle of seeking external validation?
Right. Well, usually codependents grow up with low self-esteem mainly because they don't get the praise and the acknowledgement for who they are. I mean, think about all the parents out there, especially when we were growing up, personal development, self-esteem was not a thing. And I think a lot of parents confused self-esteem with being arrogant or being conceited. So, if you grew up in a family where you should put yourself last and take care of others first and be selfless, and while that can be a lovely trait a little bit in some moderation to give, when it becomes everything, then the child learns, well, I have to give or perform to get that validation because nobody's telling me. I mean, I've heard so many of my clients say that their parents never said, I love you, or never said, you're doing a really great job. You're such a great artist, or you're such a great athlete, and really notice what was unique about them. So they learned that that was a bad thing. But then we all have that need, right? Of, well, I need that validation. I need that approval that I'm okay so that I can grow up. And so they end up seeking it out in unhealthy ways, which, ends up backfiring.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the part about parents perhaps collapsing, right, healthy self-esteem with arrogance or boasting or bragging or whatever.
Right.
Because then you're left with zero self-esteem. And that obviously isn't the opposite of arrogance. Right. And that's not great either. So how does this become such a big problem in codependency? Like, how do you see, and you kind of started talking about that. Anything else you want to say about that?
Yeah. So I think it ends up leading us into that pattern of unhealthy dependency. Because for me, I just kept searching and I kept wanting. But the problem is that we end up draining our relationships because people eventually burn out and they can't give that kind of love and validation over and over again because it's too unhealthy. And, it's just not a good thing. The other thing is that's why a lot of codependents become people pleasers and don't set boundaries, because we think, well, if we stay safe, then we're going to get that love and approval. Or if we do somebody a favor, they're going to notice and say thank you. And when they don't, we go into resentment, like, oh, how come I'm not being noticed? Or how come so-and-so got the accolades and I didn't? Because it's a very indirect way to get that approval. And it also kind of creates some dishonesty in our relationship, because if I'm expecting you to fill me up, but I don't tell you that, and then I'm mad at you because you don't do it, but then I don't tell you, I don't even admit that I'm mad. I just pretend everything's okay. It's like, oh my God, the cycle of hurt and resentment just keeps building until eventually the codependent will explode in anger, which isn't that common, but eventually it'll happen because they feel like, oh my gosh, I'm not getting anything out of this.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's a good thing to bring to awareness that, that not communicating, all of those needs and really craving something, continuing to try to make it happen and control, right. People please and control what happens and all of that. And yes, until the point of just, losing it.
Right. Because I think it's okay to ask. I mean, I could call you and say, hey, Andy, I'm having a really bad day. I just need you to tell me that I'm doing good. And you would. But if I had to do that every single time, then it's like, it's not going to work. We have to find some means to shift that and start giving it to ourselves. And I think that's the hardest part, is how do you shift that?
Yeah. And let's talk about that. So, let's talk about what it means to validate ourselves internally. Like, how do we get to that place where when we're feeling crummy and not good about ourselves, that we can supply that for ourselves? Right.
Well, to me, validation is affirming your own experience. And that's like when you're doing something well, you can say, wow, like with the video, Michelle, you know what? I think I did a really good video, even if not a lot of people saw it. Right. And I literally could say that out loud to myself. But the other part of validation is if I'm not doing well, or say I'm having a really bad day and I feel really sad, to not beat myself up for that. And to say, you know what, it's okay if I'm struggling right now. It's okay if I'm feeling sad right now. So the whole thing about validation is to kind of be where your feet are and to give yourself permission to just be great, be sad, be whatever you are. So it's kind of a mixture of acknowledgement and acceptance.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. I like how you put that in. So once we understand that and start practicing sourcing our own validation, I guess, how do we then stop, going outward and trying to get it as well?